What did medieval peasants do when their homes were cold? Their socks were scratchy, and their sleep was uneasy. Well, some of them reached for lavender. Tonight, you'll travel back to the quiet corners of 14th century England. No war, no nights, just the soft creak of timber, the flicker of firelight, and the surprisingly fragrant story of how herbs ended up inside your socks. So, settle in. Let your thoughts slow like a spinning spindle. And maybe ask yourself, would you sleep better if your feet smelled like flowers and folklore? The morning light isn't really light. Not yet. It's more of a gentle smudge, like someone took a thumb and rubbed the horizon, just enough to push back the dark. You're already awake, of course. You always wake up with the fire, or with the chickens, or with someone else's snoring directly into your eardrum. Outside, the cottage creaks like a ship at anchor. Damp air curls through the cracks in the walls, slipping across your neck and into your sleeves. The hearth is little more than warm ash, and the one blanket you share with your sister is slowly being claimed by her unconscious tug-of-war. You roll to your side. Your back complains. Your knees grumble. Your feet, bare for now, hover above the rush-covered floor, where cold seeps up with the quiet confidence of someone who's done this every morning for decades. Welcome to your life, peasant. 14th century English countryside. You'll find it's not glamorous, or efficient, or particularly clean, but it's yours. And tonight, it's going to smell faintly of lavender. A gentle reminder before we begin. You probably won't make it through this day, but that's the point, isn't it? You're not here to accomplish much. You're here to drift, to wander, to listen to the past, hum quietly in the background, while your eyelids grow heavier and your blanket, hopefully, isn't pulled entirely off by your sister again. If you're still with me, consider giving this story a soft little like, maybe even subscribe, if you're the type who enjoys slow, sleepy wanders through history. And before you nod off completely, tell me in the comments, where are you listening from? And what time is it where you are? Now let's ease into tonight's journey. You sit up slowly. There's a soft crack in your neck that sounds like an old door unlatching. The room smells like smoke, cabbage, and a faint sweetness coming from a satchel tied to the beam above your bed. Lavender. Again, your mother keeps bundles of it drying near the ceiling, says it wards off fleas, or spirits, or dreams about cows. Depends on her mood. You reach for your socks. They're scratchy, hand-knitted, and patched twice at the heel. Inside, tucked neatly into the toes, is a pinch of dried lavender blossoms. You stuff your feet in. Like always, it's oddly comforting, cool, sharp, floral, sort of like if springtime tried to write a love letter with twigs and moss. This little habit isn't just cozy, it's historical fact. Peasants, especially in rural England, often used herbs like lavender in their clothing and bedding to help with sleep, bugs, and superstition. Socks were just one delivery method. Pouches, pillows, even little bundles tucked into bodices. If you had something itchy, smelly, or haunted, there was probably a plant for that. Historians still debate whether peasants believed in the actual medicinal power of lavender, or just liked not smelling like sheep for 10 minutes. Either way, your socks smell better than your life does. So there's that. You step outside. The village is still yawning. A few doors creak open. Someone coughs. A rooster mistakes himself for important. Fog drapes across the fields, like a sleepy veil, softening everything it touches. You walk toward the well. The ground squelches underfoot. Yesterday's rain still clinging to the earth. Like its owed rent, the handle of the well groans in protest. But you get the water up eventually. It's cold, refreshing, if you're feeling generous, finger-numbing, if you're honest. Back home, your mother pours a little water into a cracked pot and sets it over the fire. She adds barley, then onions, then a sigh. Breakfast. You sit beside the hearth, rubbing your lavender toes, and wonder, not for the last time, why comfort always comes in such strange, damp packaging. The sun has finally decided to show up, though you're not convinced it's trying its best. You step outside again, this time with a half-chewed crust of bread in your mouth and a borrowed hoe in your hand. The field waits. Always the field. It doesn't care how tired you are, or how you didn't sleep because of your cousin's mysterious coughing fits, or how the wind howled through the thatch like a homesick ghost. You walk the same path you walk every day down the narrow trail, past the cow barn, where at least one cow is always looking judgmental, past the row of cottages where someone's always burning something questionable, and through the gate that doesn't really latch, so it mostly just leans and hopes for the best. The field is muddy. You are muddy. The boundary between human and earth is mostly philosophical at this point. Today's task is weeding, or at least pretending to weed. When the reeve walks by, you crouch, stab at the dirt, pull up something that might be helpful, or might be tomorrow's dinner. The rhythm settles into your bones. Stab, pull, toss, sigh, repeat. Around you, others do the same. There's not much talking, just a few hums, a sneeze, and one particularly dramatic yawn that you mentally score as a 7.5. Here's your historical moment of the day. During the Middle Ages, most peasants were bound by what's known as the manorial system. You didn't own your land, you rented it with labor. Think of it like a never-ending group project. Except your landlord is a knight, and your deadline is your lifespan. Still, you make the best of it. The weeds don't talk back, at least. A girl nearby sneezes so hard she startles a bird. She wipes her nose with her sleeve and goes back to work like it didn't happen. You admire her composure, or her apathy. Then she turns to you and grins. Bet your socks still smell better than mine. You smirk. Lavender. She snorts. Show off. It's a small exchange. A brief burst of brightness in a day made mostly of mud. Weird cultural tidbit. Here it is. Some villagers believed that certain herbs, lavender, thyme, rosemary, could protect you not just from insects or illness, but from night air, which was thought to carry disease. Socks weren't just for feet. They were tiny, scented shields against the unseen. Of course, scholars can't quite agree whether this was widespread knowledge or more of a charming quirk passed along by midwives and grandmothers. But either way, your feet feel very safe and very floral. By midday, the sun actually warms the back of your neck. You pause to stretch. Your spine makes a noise, like someone stepping on an old wicker basket. Lunch is a communal thing. Everyone gathers near the shade of the mill house. There's bread, of course. There's always bread. And a little bit of cheese that smells like regret, but tastes like salt. Someone starts telling a story about a village over the hill where a goose laid an egg shaped like a turnip. You're pretty sure this isn't how biology works, but no one interrupts. It's rude to challenge entertainment when it's this scarce. You laugh. You cough. You eat. You sit in the grass with your knees pulled up, toes still wrapped in faint lavender. It's not much, but for now, it's enough. The afternoon begins with laundry. Not yours, of course. That would be too convenient. It's your turn at the stream to help wash the parish linens, which somehow weigh more than the average ox and smell significantly worse. You balance the basket on your hip and head downhill, socks squishing gently inside your shoes. You take it as a compliment when a passing dog sniffs your feet and looks pleased. The stream is cold, icy, really, the kind of cold that makes your knuckles ache, and your soul briefly question its life choices. You dunk the first sheet into the water. It comes alive like a pale, wriggling eel and slaps you back in the face. You blink. A goose across the stream honks judgmentally. Laundry day, you mutter to yourself, because suffering builds character. A neighbor beside you chuckles without looking up. She's scrubbing a tunic, like it owes her money. Now for your historical fact of the hour. Medieval laundry was a public, social task. Streams and communal washhouses weren't just for chores. They were gossip hubs, meeting points, and informal therapy sessions. Soap, when available, was usually made from animal fat and ash, gentle on fabrics, less so on noses. One of the strangest customs you hear about as you rinse the priest's collar. In some regions, villagers believed washing clothes on certain saints' days could curse the fabric, not ruin it, curse it. The shirt might strangle you, or attract bees, or simply fall apart at a dramatic moment. No one wanted haunted trousers. Historians still debate how seriously this was taken, but enough people followed it that a surprising number of laundry days got rescheduled. You rinse, scrub, wring. Your arms ache. Your face is wet with splashback and mild despair, but there's something rhythmic, even calming about it all. You sit on a rock afterward, letting the sun dry your sleeves. The stream murmurs. The breeze shifts. A distant bell tolls. And just for a second, just one, you think, this isn't so bad. Then a goat eats half your lunch roll. Naturally, back at the cottage, you kneel by the hearth to help prepare the evening meal. This mostly involves poking things with a stick and pretending to know what's cooking. A pot bubbles softly, some sort of stew. There are turnips involved. There are always turnips involved. You reach into the storage sack and pull out a beet, or possibly an extremely tired apple. It's hard to tell. Your mother accepts it wordlessly and throws it in the pot like she's throwing shade. The cottage smells of herbs and smoke, and yes, that now familiar undercurrent of lavender. You catch a whiff each time you shift your legs. It's comforting, like you're carrying around a tiny, invisible grandmother whispering, rest is possible. You sit by the fire and start twisting string, or thread, or rope. It's unclear what it will become, but your hands move automatically, and that's the important part. Time for a new historical tidbit. Medieval peasants often made their own household tools and goods in small batches, spindles, cords, baskets, and even rough candles. Idle hands weren't just frowned upon. They were practically accused of conspiracy. If your hands weren't moving, someone assumed you were plotting or napping. And here's your obscure moment. In some regions, folks believed that keeping lavender near the hearth would ward off cottage spirits who might sneak in through the smoke. Mischievous little beings that tangled thread, soured soup, or whispered odd dreams into your ears at night. Sort of like house cats, but invisible and more judgmental. Whether or not they existed, people still kept the lavender just in case. Even skeptics, like insurance. The fire crackles. Outside, the sun is sliding behind the trees, spilling long shadows across the earth. Someone's rooster has opinions. A dog barks once, and then reconsiders. You wrap the cord in a loop and set it aside. The stew smells like it's done pretending to be interesting. You ladle it into wooden bowls and sit cross-legged on the floor. There is no table. There is no formality. There is, however, a vague sense of triumph that dinner has been cooked and no spirits interfered. You eat slowly, letting the warmth spread from your bowl to your belly to your shoulders. Across from you, your father mutters something about the sheep being full of secrets again. No one asks follow-up questions. And later, as you stretch out on the straw-filled mattress, socks still lavender-lined, and legs pleasantly tired, you feel the weight of the day settle into your bones. Not heavy, just full. You exhale. The night wraps around your little cottage like a well-worn cloak, and you sleep. The night is quiet, almost. You hear it in soft layers, the hoot of an owl somewhere out past the tree line, the gentle shifting of livestock in the shed, the wind slipping through the thatch, like it's searching for someone it forgot. A child coughs once, then sighs back into sleep. Someone snoring. Might be you. Might be your uncle. You've never entirely figured that out. You're awake now, just a little. Your body doesn't move, but your mind drifts. Somewhere between the lavender at your toes and the crackle of the last embers in the hearth, you hover. It's not quite dreaming. It's remembering. In the corner of the room, someone hung a bundle of dried herbs wrapped with twine. Not just lavender this time. There's mint and rosemary and a stubborn sprig of mugwort. They rattle gently whenever the wind shifts, like a very sleepy maraca. Fun fact to carry into the haze. Peasants in medieval Europe often used herbal bundles called dream pillows or sleep sachets, not just for aroma. These were believed to invite good dreams, protect against night terrors, and prevent sleepwalking, which was apparently seen as less of a medical concern and more of a mystical one. Scholars, as always, remain torn. Were these traditions rooted in folk wisdom, or were people simply doing whatever it took to make their hay-stuffed lives a little softer? You shift under the blanket. It smells like wood smoke and someone else's feet, but it's home. You think briefly about your day, the field, the laundry, the goat, Trader. It wasn't exciting, but it was full, real, quietly complex in a way only simple lives are. Outside, the stars do their slow work, cold light filtering through cracks in the roof, catching on the edge of a pewter bowl, glinting off a spider's thread that stretches confidently across the beams like it pays rent here. Your last waking thought is this: the lavender really does help. And then, just like that, you're asleep again. Dawn returns, like a late apology. You stir beneath your blanket, nose first. It's cold, crisp, but the kind of cold that feels honest, like it hasn't lied to you. The fire has died. The socks are still on. You wiggle your toes, still faintly, floral, still winning. You sit up slowly, muscles creaking in harmony. The cottage is quiet, except for the sounds of someone outside chopping kindling with slightly too much enthusiasm. You think it might be your cousin, with something to prove. Stretching feels heroic. You yawn like it's a personal statement. Breakfast is already happening by the time you make it to the hearth. A bowl of thin oat porridge, steaming gently in the gray light. Your mother tosses in a few dried berries and calls it a feast. You eat with a wooden spoon that used to be twice as long, until someone used it to stir soap and forgot to confess. As you eat, she hands you a tiny cloth sachet. "Put this in your boot," she says, without looking at you. You peek inside lavender and rosemary again, this time with a hint of chamomile. "You've got a journey today," she adds, as if this is normal. "Fetch from the mill." Ah, the mill. 2 miles of walking. Uphill, both ways, somehow. But there's bread at the end of it, and that's reason enough. Today's historical fact. Most medieval villages were centered around a mill, which was often owned by the local lord. Peasants were required to use it to grind their grain, for a fee, of course. Even bread had a bureaucracy. You slip the sachet into your boot. It's oddly comforting, like carrying a piece of home with you. On the way out, your sister reminds you to avoid the goose path. You don't ask why. You already know why. So you set off. The road is muddy but familiar. You pass the same leaning fence, the same cartwheel, half submerged in the earth, the same patch of nettles that always pretends it's not nettles. You do not fall for it. The world is still yawning awake. The fields glow gold in the early light. A few sheep bleat from across a ditch. You wave politely. They ignore you, as always. As you crest a small hill, you see the mill's great wooden wheel turning slowly in the distance, creaking like it's gossiping with the stream. You pass a woman with a woven basket on her head, humming something that sounds like a lullaby, but might just be a really slow complaint. And tucked behind a hedgerow, You spot a strange little scarecrow, stuffed with rags and herbs, lavender tied at its wrists. You pause. Weird cultural tidbit. Some regions believed lavender could not only soothe humans, but also frighten away field spirits who tampered with crops, a sort of agrarian aromatherapy exorcism. Whether it worked? Well, the wheat grew. Usually, you nod respectfully to the scarecrow and keep walking. The mill looms ahead. It smells like dust, yeast, and someone's sweaty ambition. You take a deep breath. Your socks still smell better. You knock twice on the door, and the miller's daughter greets you with a tired smile and flour in her eyebrows. You here for the usual? You nod, and maybe something extra for the walk. She hands you a cloth-wrapped lump. Bread, warm and alive with rosemary. You tuck it into your pouch like treasure. The return journey is slower, heavier, but in a good way. The sun's higher now. The breeze, a little less biting. You walk past the nettles again. They wave. You do not wave back. And by the time your cottage roof comes into view, you feel every muscle in your legs, and a strange satisfaction in knowing you used all of them. You're a peasant, but you have bread and lavender, and honestly, that's enough. You arrive home just as your cousin is wrestling with a chicken who seems deeply uninterested in being helpful. Feathers float lazily through the air like nature's confetti. The chicken wins. You nod in solidarity and step around the commotion, tucking your warm bundle of bread on the shelf beside the hearth. It's already slightly flatter than before, but that's gravity's fault, not yours. The rest of the day lies ahead, and surprise, it involves wool. You sit outside on a low stool, the kind that threatens to collapse every third use, but never quite follows through. In your lap is a pile of unspun fleece, still clinging to small pieces of twig, hay, and mystery. You start to card it, pulling the wool through two paddles, covered in wire bristles, until the fibers straighten into something usable. It's repetitive, work, meditative, the kind of task that doesn't require your full attention, which is ideal, because your attention is still somewhere between the bread and your nap. Historical fact of the moment: wool was England's most important export. In the medieval period, entire villages depended on it. Even peasants with no land to farm might spin, card, or weave wool to contribute to the local economy, or simply to clothe their family through winter, which is always closer than it seems. As your hands work, a neighbor stops by with a bundle of dyed thread, an earthy red, made from madder root. She offers a trade. You agree, and soon find yourself with a small pouch of dried lavender in return. She says her husband snores like a boiling kettle, and she needs the good stuff. Weird cultural tidbit: some believed that placing lavender under a snorer's pillow would calm the breath. Whether this worked or just made the bedroom smell prettier is unclear. Historians still debate whether this counts as medicine or passive-aggressive herbalism. You keep carding. The afternoon passes with quiet chatter and the soft squeak of the stool beneath you. You sneeze once wool dust, and the neighbor blesses you with 3 different saint names, just to be safe. The sun dips behind a cloud, and the breeze picks up. You pull your cloak tighter. The socks, ever floral, are still holding strong. By sunset, you've spun enough yarn to wrap around the cottage twice. Not that you will, but it's comforting to imagine. You stretch your fingers, they crack. The chicken is still watching you, judgment in its tiny eyes. You head inside. Evening again. The sky glows with the soft hues of a fruit you've never eaten. Purples, oranges, maybe even a blush of something golden. You're not a poet, but even you have to admit, it's pretty out. Dinner tonight is boiled root vegetables, and you act surprised when it turns out to be turnips again. The acting is not convincing, but your mother plays along. As you eat, someone knocks at the door. A traveling tinker. wrapped in a patched cloak, with eyes like someone who's seen too many inns and not enough good soup. You offer him a seat and a bowl. Hospitality is expected in the village, but it's also how you learn things. He brings news from a town a few days away, where the baker's daughter apparently eloped with a stable boy and 3 goats. It's unclear who initiated it. The tinker notices the lavender bundle near the rafters and nods. Smart, he says, keeps the bad dreams out. He then pulls from his pack a tiny tin of salve, made with beeswax and lavender, good for sore joints or marriages. You trade him a coil of your hand-spun yarn and a slightly lopsided spoon. Everyone wins. Here's your historical anchor. Tinkers were common in the Middle Ages, traveling from place to place, mending pots, trading goods, and spreading news, sometimes true, often not. They were part of a vital informal network, especially in rural communities. The medieval version of social media, but with fewer cat pictures. And here's your obscure gem. In some parts of Europe, people believed that lavender kept not just fleas away, but wandering spirits too, particularly those that followed travelers. A lavender sachet near the door was thought to keep such visitors and their supernatural tagalongs from overstaying their welcome. Scholars aren't entirely sure whether this belief was widespread or just something invented by a very tired innkeeper. The fire crackles as the tinker settles in for the night near the hearth. You lend him a wool blanket and try not to make eye contact with the chicken, who has now taken up roost on your stool like it owns stock in your misery. You crawl into bed, pull the blanket over your shoulders, and inhale lavender, wood smoke, slightly burnt, turnip, home. You fall asleep with the soft murmur of the tinkers humming in the background and the warmth of a day well spent settling into your bones. You wake to the sound of the tinker softly stirring the fire, careful not to wake the rest of the household. The cottage is still dim, the morning light creeping slowly through gaps in the walls, like it's unsure whether it's welcome. You lie still for a moment, socks half kicked off in your sleep, one foot blissfully scented, the other boldly lavender-free and somehow colder. You wiggle your toes. It's an uneven battle, but the floral side is winning. The tinker nods at you as you rise. Didn't snore much, he offers kindly, though it's hard to tell whether that's a compliment or a report. You stretch, yawn, and help rekindle the hearth, using dried moss and the stub of a candle as kindling. Breakfast is a shared crust of yesterday's bread, softened in warm milk. The tinker adds a sliver of apple from his pack. It's barely edible. It tastes like friendship. After he leaves, with a gentle wave and a pouch, now half full of lavender, you step out into the fresh morning. The air smells of dew, distant chimney smoke, and possibility. Today's task, the herb garden. Nestled behind the cottage, the little plot is home to rows of stubborn green things: sage, wormwood, mint, chamomile, and of course, lavender. You tend to it with your fingers in the dirt, and your thoughts wandering off wherever they like. Here's your fact for the day. Medieval peasants grew herbs not just for cooking, but for medicine, trade, and spiritual protection. Monasteries kept detailed herbals, early books listing plants and their uses, but villagers had their own oral traditions, passed through grandmothers and gossip, and your curious cultural tidbit. In parts of England and France, it was believed that lavender planted near doorways could prevent arguments inside the house. Whether this worked or just made doorways smell pleasant is still up for debate. As you pinch back dead leaves and loosen soil around the roots, you find a tiny snail and move it to a damp stone. A ladybug lands on your sleeve and then politely takes off again. The morning passes gently. Your hands become fragrant, earthy, alive. You carry an armful of cuttings into the cottage. leaving sprigs of mint and lavender on the windowsill to dry. The air changes slightly, lighter, softer. You don't say anything, but you feel it. Peace, slow growing, like time. Later, you're walking again. Not far, just to the edge of the woods, where mushrooms like to gather in awkward little circles, and the trees lean in like old friends with secrets. You carry a small basket on your arm, looking for kindling, moss, and maybe, if the earth is generous, a few berries or early mushrooms. It's cooler here, damp, quiet in that deeply natural way that makes even your breath feel like a guest. You kneel to pick a fallen branch. Nearby, a hedgehog pauses mid-snuffle to regard you with what might be suspicion or indigestion. You nod. He nods. A mutual agreement of silence. Your fact for this stroll. Forests were essential to medieval village life. Wood for fires, bark for tannins, berries, and herbs for medicine. While officially owned by the Lord, peasants often had rights to collect certain things, depending on local customs and whether the reeve was in a forgiving mood. Today, you're lucky. No one's watching, and the moss is particularly soft. You gather carefully, avoiding patches of fungi that look like they'd rather be left alone. There's a log blanketed in lichen, and nearby, a hollow where violets peek shyly from the shadows. And here's your wonderfully odd cultural tidbit. Some villagers believed that lavender planted near the woods could confuse woodland spirits, fae, brownies, or others unnamed, who might otherwise follow a person home. A pinch of dried lavender in your shoe was said to turn their feet backward. Whether this worked or simply gave you fragrant arches is, predictably, still uncertain among scholars. Back on the path, you walk slowly. The wind brushes the leaves above you. A crow caws in the distance, sounding like it's late for something. You take your time. You carry moss and a story. And as you step into the clearing, just before the village boundary, you feel it again. That odd little moment where history brushes against your sleeve and says, "Keep going." So you do. The basket is heavier now, but so are your thoughts, in the good way. Like a full pot simmering, like dreams still unspoken, like a sock, quietly scented with lavender, waiting for the long sleep ahead. You return to the village in time to see two children racing a wooden hoop down the lane, like it's the most important competition of the decade. One of them is winning by sheer chaos. The other is attempting strategy and immediately trips over a chicken. You step aside just in time, smiling, and the younger one yells, "It's not fair." He greased his stick. You carry your basket home, full of the forest's quiet offerings. Your mother eyes the moss approvingly, then immediately hands you a spindle. Apparently, it's spinning time again. You sit near the doorway where the afternoon light falls, in warm patches, golden and slow-moving, like syrup over porridge. Your fingers work the spindle, twist, drop, wind, repeat. The rhythm is oddly pleasing, like a lullaby without a tune. Historical fact for the hour: hand spinning was one of the most constant tasks in a medieval peasant's life. From the age of 5 or 6, girls were expected to contribute to the household's supply of yarn and thread, sometimes spinning for hours each day while walking, minding siblings, or even just thinking. It's why we call unmarried women spinsters, which, frankly, sounds more poetic than it should. A neighbor stops by with a cracked pot and stays for a chat. She smells like soap and goose feathers. She brings news about a distant cousin's sheep having twins. Everyone pretends this is thrilling. You trade her a few handfuls of mint from the drying shelf. In return, she gives you a single cinnamon clove. It's from the apothecary 2 towns over, and it smells like luxury, mystery, and 6 weeks' wages. Weird cultural tidbit. In some parts of medieval Europe, People believed that placing cloves in one's pillow would ward off nightmares and illness. Combined with lavender, it was thought to cool the temper and prevent sleepwalking during full moons. Historians still debate whether this counts as early aromatherapy or creative wishful thinking. You finish winding the last thread onto the spindle. The neighbor leaves. The sun shifts. You stretch your arms above your head, joints popping like kernels over a slow fire. Your socks are still faintly fragrant. You're starting to believe in them. You head outside for some fresh air before supper, walking slowly, the kind of walk where you look at things you've passed 1,000 times and wonder if they've always been beautiful. Spoiler, they have. You were just always in a hurry. Supper tonight is a thick lentil stew that seems more confident than usual. It smells like it knows things. You ladle it into bowls, careful not to spill, though the floor's already seen worse. As you eat, the topic of discussion, eyes once again, dreams. Your sister says she had a dream where the church bell melted and everyone had to use cowbells to call mass. Your grandmother mutters that this happened once in her village, and it did not end well. Someone else claims to have seen a dream mouse, a tiny mouse with wings and a face like a nun's. You decide not to follow up. Lavender, your mother insists, keeps the weird dreams away. She's convinced it works best if you rub it between your palms before bed, wakes the spirit in the plant. She says. You nod and keep eating. The stew is hot and grounding, like it's trying to tuck you in from the inside out. And here's your sleepy fact of the section. Dream interpretation in medieval Europe wasn't just idle funit, was taken seriously. Some dreams were seen as messages from God, others from devils, and many were blamed on cheese. Truly, certain foods were believed to cause active dreams. Cheese, onions, and beans topped the list. Lavender, by contrast, was meant to calm the mind and cool the humors. You tuck that away as you finish your bowl. Tonight, before bed, you take your mother's advice and rub a pinch of lavender between your palms. The scent blooms, sharper now, green, sweet, and somehow ancient. You crawl into your straw mattress, tucking the cloth sachet beneath your chin. The room glows faintly with the last light from the hearth. The fire sighs. Someone outside hums a lullaby to their goats. And just before your eyes close, you remember something from the woods. A violet quietly blooming in the shade. You smile, and sleep finds you quickly this time. No dream mice, just warmth, and the slow unraveling of another quiet, lavender-wrapped day. You wake to a quiet morning. No rooster, no coughing, no clattering of pots. Just a soft kind of stillness, like the whole village pressed snooze. You sit up slowly, blinking into the gray light filtering through the small window. It's raining just enough to whisper. You can hear it tapping gently against the thatch, like the sky is politely checking in. Your socks are still on, one slightly twisted, one perfectly aligned, both carrying the fading comfort of crushed lavender and yesterday's dreams. You move carefully, not because you're sore, though you are, but because everything around you feels balanced, as if moving too fast might disturb the peace. Breakfast is a smaller affair today. A heel of bread softened in warm milk again. But someone added a pinch of honey. A luxury. You eat slowly, letting the sweetness linger. Your task for the day is indoor work. Rainy day chores. Mending mostly. Clothes, nets, dignity, all the usual suspects. You sit by the window with a needle and a shirt that looks like it's been in at least 3 minor sword fights. Though it's only ever met laundry and bad luck, you thread the needle with a sigh that feels inherited. Today's historical moment, clothing in the Middle Ages, was precious. Most peasants owned only 1 or 2 complete outfits. Clothes were patched, repurposed, handed down, and eventually turned into rags or quilt stuffing. A hole didn't mean replacement. It meant you got out the sewing kit. Again, across from you, your grandmother is darning socks with the kind of concentration that suggests either deep meditation or quiet war with the wool. You're not sure which. Weird cultural tidbit. In some regions, people believed mending clothes after sunset was bad luck. It could so closed your luck or trap dreams in the seams. But rainy days didn't count, apparently. The rules were flexible, like your shirt's neckline or your cousin's morals. Historians still debate whether such customs were symbolic or just convenient excuses to avoid sewing by candlelight, which, to be fair, sounds like a trap. By midday, the rain lets up just enough for a walk. You step outside and inhale that earthy, mineral smell that only follows a soft storm, the kind that makes even the weeds look poetic. You stroll past puddles and soggy chickens. The village is quieter today. People speak in lower voices, like the rain hasn't quite left yet, and might hear something rude. You pass by your own herb garden. The lavender glistens. Its purple blossoms heavier now, more fragrant. It bows slightly under the weight of the storm. Still standing, though, like you, this evening, something special happens. A traveler has arrived. Not a tinker this time, but a storyteller. Someone with too many scarves and just enough teeth to seem wise. They're invited in, naturally. A guest is a guest, and stories are always welcome currency. The cottage fills quickly. People bring stools, bread ends, and a questionable apple. Someone brings a chicken. No one comments. You all huddle near the hearth as the fire crackles, casting flickering shadows on the walls, like they're leaning in to listen too. The storyteller speaks slowly, carefully, like every word weighs something. She begins with a tale of a lavender field that grew in the shadow of a crumbling castle, where villagers swore the air itself could lull you to sleep, and where no one had ever had a nightmare. Not once. She says the scent was so strong, birds flew slower. Babies smiled in their sleep. Even the sheep seemed slightly more polite. Your mother nods along, clearly invested. Your grandmother mutters something about sheep being beyond redemption, but listens anyway. Here's your historical thread. Storytelling was one of the main forms of entertainment for medieval peasants. With no books, no plays, and absolutely no podcasts, stories were shared orally, long narratives passed from mouth to mouth, like warm bread. They weren't just for fun. They taught morals, history, and how not to get cursed by a well, and your odd cultural flourish. In some places, it was believed that if you told a lie in a story while sitting near lavender, the plant would wilt on the spot. Some even placed sprigs in their lap while listening, just to keep the speaker honest. Historians aren't sure whether this was a common belief or just something lavender farmers came up with to boost sales. The story drifts on. Tales of herbalists and monks, of noble women who sewed lavender sachets into their sleeves, of knights who carried it into battle, not for strength, but for sleep. By the end, everyone is quieter. Even the fire burns more softly, as if it's been told a bedtime story too. The storyteller is offered a bundle of herbs and a corner near the hearth. She accepts with a smile that says she's heard it all and still wants to hear more. You climb into bed again, the lavender sachet now slightly worn, but still fragrant. Tonight, you sleep before your head even settles on the straw-stuffed pillow. And if you dream, you don't remember it, which, you decide, is probably the best kind. Morning again, but this one's different. You're rested, like properly rested. Your joints still complain a little, but it's more of a friendly grumble than a formal protest. The air is warmer, the breeze softer, and your feet, wrapped in their now iconic lavender-scented socks, feel like they've slept too. You step outside, squinting into the sun. It's late spring now, or early summer. Hard to tell the exact date when your calendar is just before planting and after harvest. A neighbor waves from across the lane. You wave back with your whole arm, not because you're enthusiastic, but because that's how waving works here. Grand gestures, small voices. Today, the plan is simple. Gathering more lavender, not for trade, not even for socks, just to refill the sachets, to keep the air soft, to make sure the scent of sleep never strays too far. You walk to the edge of the herb plot, where the lavender has grown tall and unruly, like a noblewoman who no longer cares about court etiquette. The blossoms sway gently in the breeze, their purple heads nodding like old friends with secrets to tell. Historical fact, one final time. By the late medieval period, lavender was cultivated in monastery gardens across Europe. While peasants didn't always have access to organized medicine, many had local herbalists or simply used what they grew themselves. Lavender was prized for its calming effects and its ability to repel lice and other unwanted guests. In other words, peace and hygiene in a single flower. You begin to snip the stems, one by one. A careful harvest, the air fills with that familiar scent, layered with sun-warmed earth and a hint of mint from the nearby patch. Weird final tidbit. In some households, lavender was tied above cradles to protect infants from moon sickness, a vague but deeply unsettling term that may or may not have just meant teething. Scholars remain unconvinced, though a few admit they would also tie herbs above a crying baby if it had even a chance of helping. You tie the bundles and hang them from the rafters, watching as their color deepens in the dim light. They'll dry slowly, whispering their scent into the air for weeks. Later, you sit with your family near the fire, a loaf of bread between you and a story on someone's lips. The day winds down like a spool of thread, familiar, slow, steady, and when night comes, there's no ceremony, no fanfare. You slip on your socks washed now, restuffed with fresh lavender, and lie back on your straw mattress. The cottage is quiet, not silent, just full of friendly sounds. A crackling ember, a breath, a creak of wood adjusting to the dark. And outside, the night settles over the village like a heavy quilt stitched with stars. And now, let it all fade. Let the sounds of the cottage dimth, soft shuffle of straw, the hush of breathing, the way the fire sighs one last time before drifting into coals. Feel the weight of the day slide gently from your shoulders. Nothing more is needed. Not tonight. Not now. The lavender is faint, but still there. A thread of scent woven through the air, reminding you that someone once thought of this, that someone long ago, standing in a patch of purple blossoms, thought this will help them sleep. Let the images drift like mist through your thoughts. A bundle of herbs tied with twine, a spindle turning slowly beside a window, the steady creak of a cart rolling over earth, a single sheep staring, as they always do, into your soul. You've walked this village. You've worked these days. You've sat by the fire with your socks slightly askew and your stomach full of something vaguely turnip-shaped. You've listened to the stories. Now you don't need to hold on to any of it. Just let the weight of it all gently float away, like smoke curling upward into beams, like mist sliding over the hills, like a thought that doesn't need an ending. And as you lie there, somewhere between the 14th century and your pillow, know this: the past will keep. The lavender is still blooming, and morning is very far away. Sleep well. But if, perhaps, you're still awake, maybe just curious enough to wander a little further down history's sleepy lane, we could follow the scent of old wood and boiled onions to another place, another kind of night. Not in a cottage, this time, but in a creaky roadside inn, somewhere off a muddy medieval road. The fire is louder here. The floorboards don't trust you. There's a tangle of smells: ale, damp wool, and something suspiciously herbal. You step inside, slowly, and above the door, a long curling rope of onions sways gently in the smoky air. Not just for decoration, not just for dinner, but something stranger, something that somehow rated whether this place was clean enough to sleep in. Ready? Then let's ease into tonight's new story. Boring history for sleep. How medieval inns used onion ropes to rate cleanliness. It's just past dusk, and you're cold, hungry, and more than a little damp. The road behind you is long and stubborn, more puddle than path, with just enough mud to make your socks question all their life choices. Your cloak is wet at the hem, your feet ache, and your stomach has been making negotiation noises for at least an hour. But up ahead, thankfully, finally, you see it. A crooked silhouette against the fading sky, a two-story timber-framed inn, just barely upright, as if it's leaning into the wind out of habit. Light glows behind warped shutters. Smoke curls from the chimney in lazy ribbons. A door creaks open and then shuts again. You've found shelter, probably. A soft warning floats in with the night air. You probably won't make it through this evening, at least not consciously, if you enjoy falling asleep, while slowly, soothingly absorbing centuries-old trivia about how onions once helped. Medieval travelers judge the cleanliness of inns. Consider tapping the like button or subscribing if you're the type who likes your historical facts served with a warm fire, some hay-stuffed bedding, and a faint aroma of ale and sarcasm. And let me know, where are you listening from tonight? What time is it? Where you are? Now, let's ease into tonight's journey. You push open the door. It groans. The inside is dim, smoky, and, miraculously, warm. A low fire burns in the hearth, guarded by a few old chairs and one very round dog who raises an eyebrow but does not otherwise object to your presence. The room smells like ale, stew, moss, and what you hope is a hint of dried lavender. You blink through the smoke and see what you came here to rest under. A rope of onions strung above the doorframe, swaying faintly in the draft. It's not just there for flavor. Here's your first historical curiosity. In some medieval inns, onion ropes were used as a kind of smell-based cleanliness test. The idea? If the onions could stay fresh, unsoured, unspoiled, despite hanging in the public taproom or near the hearth, then the air was considered safe, the innkeeper somewhat hygienic, and your lungs unlikely to be offended in the night. Of course, historians still debate whether this was common practice or simply a quirk of a few towns with overly ambitious vegetable decorators. Still, the onions sway, the fire crackles. You step fully inside. The innkeeper grunts a greeting, possibly a name, possibly a warning. He gestures toward a stool, then disappears behind a curtain that's doing its very best to be a door. You sit. The stool wobbles. A cat hops onto the table beside you and begins kneading a folded blanket like it's collecting rent. Other guests murmur around the room, nursing clay mugs and bowls of something that might be stew or might be a dare. It's unclear. No one seems alarmed. The warmth begins to reach your hands, your toes. The soles of your boots finally start to forgive you. Above you, the onions sway again, like they're keeping score. You take in the room more carefully now. The walls are dark wood, stained with years of smoke and stories. Iron hooks dangle from beams, some empty, others cradling bundles of herbs, ladles, and one mysterious object shaped like a misshapen teapot, crossed with a small boot. The fire crackles again, a little louder this time, like it's telling secrets in a language made entirely of creaks and pops. You lean back cautiously. The chair accepts you, but only just. Here's your historical fact. For the hour, medieval inns were wildly inconsistent. Some were welcoming, clean, and reasonably quiet. Others were little more than barns with beer. Regulations varied from place to place, and the quality of your rest often depended on which saint's day it was, how much bread the innkeeper had left, or whether the onions above the hearth were still crisp. And yes, the onion ropes again. It turns out they weren't just a decorative choice or accidental leftovers from dinner prep. In some households, and notably inns, the condition of hanging onions was a kind of low-tech air quality test. If they rotted quickly, something was off. Poor ventilation, too much smoke, dampness, illness maybe. One 15th century traveler even claimed he could tell the difference between a safe bed and a sick one by how glassy-eyed the onions appeared. Whether that's poetic flair or just an excuse to complain about accommodations, scholars haven't quite agreed. But still, the onions stayed up, just in case. You glance toward the hearth again. A man with a wool cap is dozing upright, his hand still gripping a spoon. A woman nearby is carefully peeling the label off a candle, as if it wronged her personally. The innkeeper returns with your meal, a bowl steaming, vaguely promising. Inside, lentils, possibly, with hints of leek, barley, and something that tastes like old optimism. You eat slowly. It's warm. That's enough. The cat stretches and climbs into your lap without apology. You accept your new role in its life. A lute begins to pluck softly from the corner, played by someone who knows 3 chords and one haunting melody about a sheep who got lost, but found enlightenment in a barrel of cider. Your eyelids begin to drift. The onions above the hearth sway again, still firm, still fresh, still watching. You don't fall asleep at the table, not quite, but you definitely blink a little slower now. The firelight dances on your eyelids. The cat in your lap is a gentle, vibrating anchor to the present. A spoon clinks lazily in someone else's bowl. The lute player has moved on to a slightly more cheerful tune, though it's still the musical equivalent of watching bread rise. Your stew is half eaten. You're not even sure when you stopped. But there's something oddly satisfying about just sitting here, full of warm lentils and half-plausible comfort. Above you, the onion rope sways again, slow and measured, like it's keeping time with your thoughts. Here's your historical flavor of the hour. Onions were not only used as culinary staples in medieval Europe, they were believed to have purifying properties. People hung them in kitchens, tap rooms, and sick rooms, not just to absorb smells, but to draw out illness from the air. They were the poor man's purifier. The humble onion became both nourishment and household talisman. And for innkeepers, who couldn't afford fancy herbs or monk-approved potions, a fresh-smelling onion was the closest thing to a 3-star cleanliness rating. Of course, historians still raise an eyebrow at this. Was it superstition, observational science, or simply wishful thinking wrapped in a vegetable? Back in the room, the pace has slowed. Guests settle into the kind of silence that only happens after stew and ale. The man in the wool cap has slid fully sideways and is now softly snoring into a pillow that looks like it's stuffed with regrets and barley husks. The innkeeper shuffles over to stoke the fire. He glances up at the onions, gives a barely perceptible nod, and mutters something like, "Still good," then vanishes behind his curtain again. You get the sense this place hasn't changed in 100 years, possibly longer. You look around and try to count the number of sleeping faces. 3. No, 4, if you include the cat. One of the bundles near the rafters isn't herbs after all. It's a sack of onions. More backup. You lean your head against the wall. It's warmer than you expect, or maybe you're just finally thawing out from the road. Somewhere outside, rain starts again. Soft, steady. Inside, the air is thick with heat, sleep, and something faintly savory. You let yourself sink a little further. The onions approve. You wake, or maybe just shift sometime later, when a breeze rolls in from the cracked window above. It carries the scent of damp leaves, wood smoke, and something unplaceable. Possibly a dog that got philosophical in the rain. The room is darker, now. Candles have burned low. The lute is silent, leaning in a corner, like it's just too tired to care anymore. You stretch your back slightly. The cat has left, likely in pursuit of crumbs or vengeance. You feel strangely refreshed for someone who's barely moved. The innkeeper returns with a blanket, mutters, "Too late for rooms," and tosses it over your shoulders with the grace of someone who's done this 17 times this month. You nod your thanks. He nods back. Neither of you feels the need to use nouns. Tonight's bed is a bench. It has one leg shorter than the others, but there's straw on it, a pillow, and, miraculously, your socks are still dry. That's all you need. Historical fact time. Beds in medieval inns were not guaranteed. If the inn was full, or if your coin pouch was light, you might end up on the floor, near the hearth, or wherever there was space not currently occupied by livestock. Shared bedding was common, and so were communal rooms where strangers snored side by side without complaint. Privacy was for the wealthy. For the rest, there was proximity and a strong sense of don't ask questions. Weird cultural tidbit. In a few regions, it was believed that hanging onions near beds could guard against bad dreams, especially in shared spaces. They were said to draw down night vapors and neutralize bad humors, like a mildly crunchy dream catcher. Scholars disagree on how widespread this belief was, but at least one chronicler described an inn where guests would not sleep unless their onions were present, a bold statement, possibly the world's first organic sleep aid testimonial. You pull the blanket closer, letting the warmth settle. The bench creaks. A mouse scurries under the wall. Someone nearby mutters in their sleep, something about spoons and betrayal. You close your eyes again, just for a moment, and overhead, gently swinging in the fire-warmed draft, the onion rope still sways, still fresh, still holding the line, still watching. You wake slowly, the kind of wakefulness that creeps in around the edges, like sunlight through badly patched shutters. The inn is quieter now. The fire has faded to a soft orange cradle of coals, casting shadows that move slowly, like they too are trying not to wake anyone. You stretch gently on your wobbly bench. The blanket has slipped to the floor, and someone has covered you with a second one, this one heavier, woollier, and smelling faintly of smoked meat and lavender. A signature inn scent, perhaps. Above you, the onion rope is still there, steady, silent, suspended like a slow metronome, counting down to breakfast. The tap room is a low murmur of soft snoring, distant clinking, and someone in the far corner whispering what sounds like an apology to their own boots. Your first thought of the day. The onions didn't rot overnight. Your second thought, maybe that stew wasn't as questionable as it looked. Today's historical note. Travelers in the medieval world often judged inns by smell, not stars. Scent was a major indicator of cleanliness, ventilation, and food quality. Foul-smelling inn might mean stale air, bad food, illness, or spoiled drink. So, people learned to trust their nose and the onions. And here's your peculiar tidbit. In some towns, inns were fined if guests fell ill too often, especially if multiple travelers complained of stinking beds or sour sheets. While rare, records exist of onion ropes being cited in disputes, either as proof of good care or as one disgruntled merchant claimed a poor attempt to perfume misery. Historians are still unsure whether this was genuine practice or just bureaucratic flair with a vegetable accent. You sit up fully now, rubbing sleep from your eyes. The innkeeper is awake and sweeping with a broom that looks like it's been passed down since Charlemagne. He hums, off-key but confident. He glances toward the onion rope, then the guests, nods to himself. You're beginning to think the onions really are part of the staff. He brings you a mug of something warm and pale. You ask what it is. He replies with a shrug and one word, morning. It's oddly comforting. You drink slowly, watch the light spill through the shutters in crooked lines, and when you finally stand, stretch, and wander over to the hearth, you swear the onions, give a little approving swing. You've agreed to help, not officially, but in the sleepy, wordless way that exists between a nod, a broom, and an innkeeper handing you a cloth and pointing toward the empty mugs. Cleaning the tap room is almost meditative. You collect cups, brush crumbs, and shake the rugs out the back door, where a sheep immediately walks across them again. It feels personal. One by one, the other guests wake. The woman from last night finds her shoe under a table leg and laughs like she's just solved a mystery. A young scribe asks if anyone saw where his ink pot went. No one did. The cat probably knows. While scrubbing a table, you glance up and see it again. The onion rope, still swinging faintly from the draft. Your historical anchor for today. Onion ropes were often hung in food stores, kitchens, and inns for both practical and symbolic purposes. Onions repel pests and absorb moisture, which made them a cheap and accessible choice for preserving air quality. Their smell wasn't just accepted, it was considered medicinal, but their placement above doors and hearths also had meaning. Some believed onions could ward off bad spirits, especially those thought to ride on the backs of travelers, creeping in at night. This threshold charm tradition extended to garlic, rosemary, and lavender as well, but onions were the most aromatic. One chronicler noted that no plague nor impolite spirit dare enter where the onion sways. Whether that's folklore or just aggressive marketing is, of course, debated. You rinse a bowl in a basin of cold water. The cat jumps up and knocks over a jug. No one is surprised. The morning light spreads slowly across the room, lighting up the motes of flower dust and old air. It feels like stepping into a painting, one that smells like stewed turnips and wood polish. Guests begin to leave, some with thanks, some with muttered curses about stiff backs and shared benches. One leaves behind a single silver coin and a sprig of mint, carefully tied with a bit of twine. You tidy the last of the bowls. The innkeeper hands you a warm roll and a glance that might be gratitude, might be, you're part of this now. You eat by the hearth again, and when the cat curls back up in your lap without asking, you don't argue. Overhead, the onion rope swings once, gently, knowingly, like it remembers every guest who ever passed beneath it, and quietly decided to stay. The rush is over now. The clatter of bowls, the shuffle of cloaks, the awkward murmurs of travelers, waking up beside strangers. They've all faded into quiet again. The inn breathes slowly, like an old animal at rest. You finish the roll, still warm in the center, slightly burnt at the edge. Perfect. You lean back on your bench, with one hand on your belly, and the other lazily petting the cat, who has appointed itself your supervisor. The innkeeper returns with a jug of cider, light, early, probably more apple than alcohol, and tops off your cup without asking. In exchange, you help me tie new bundles of herbs to the rafters. Today's blend includes rosemary, sage, and one shy sprig of mugwort, lavender, if there's any left, and, of course, onions. You help him loop a new rope and hang it above the fireplace, just beside the older one. The older onions have started to wrinkle, but still hold their shape. You're not sure whether it's charming or ominous. Possibly both. Here's your historical bite of the day. Air quality mattered in medieval inns, even if the science wasn't fully understood. With smoke from open hearths, unwashed travelers, chamber pots in the corner, and wet dogs underfoot, the air inside could turn unpleasant fast. Herbs and vegetables weren't just for seasoning. They were the original medieval air fresheners. Onion, ropes, in particular, were known to absorb foul odors, deter pests, and allegedly detect bad air associated with sickness. If an onion turned black or soft too quickly, that was taken as a sign the place needed purging or prayer. Some sources even mention innkeepers consulting onions like oracles. A mushy bulb by morning. Someone brought in a fever. A dry one. Safe night. Clean bedding. Historians raise eyebrows, but admit they had few tools, and onions were honest. You sip your cider. It's tart and grounding. The innkeeper doesn't talk much, but every now and then he gestures to the onions and says, "Still fresh." You think that's his motto? Or maybe a compliment. Outside, a new traveler arrives. Dusty cloak, muddy boots, wide eyes scanning the doorframe. He steps in, and like clockwork, he glances at the onions. You nod. They're still fresh. He relaxes, drops his bag, orders something thick and beige. Trust is won by very simple things here. Later that day, you find yourself in the kitchen, if it can be called that. It's more of an alcove, really. A nook off the tap room with a soot-streaked hearth, a single window propped open by a rolling pin, and a faint, eternal scent of burnt flour. Someone left onions on the chopping board, next to a crusty wedge of cheese, and a very bold mouse who is clearly in negotiations. The innkeeper invites you in with a grunt and a nod toward the pot. You stir it, slowly. It resists, like something that doesn't want to become food. Eventually, it gives in and becomes stew, soup, a warm situation. You help slice onions, carefully, even respectfully. And now, for today's curious cultural garnish. Some medieval innkeepers believed that how an onion sounded when sliced could predict the quality of the day. A crisp snap meant good business. A wet squelch meant rain, or an argument, or someone tracking mud into the beds. One old record tells of a woman in Ghent who wouldn't open her inn until her onions spoke sweetly. Whether poetic or just a case of dramatic, chopping is, as usual, uncertain. You don't hear anything special from your onions, but they smell right. Strong, sweet, earthy, like something that knows how to keep secrets. As the pot begins to bubble, the kitchen fills with a soft fog of scent. Barley, garlic, onion, a hint of thyme. It's the kind of smell that soaks into walls, clothes, and long-term memory. You and the innkeeper work in easy silence. He hands you a spoon. You taste. It's better than yesterday. Marginally. Maybe the onions helped. You bring out bowls to the new guests, passing under the rope again. A gentle swing catches your eye. Still fresh. Still present. Still the inn's quiet, papery judges. That evening, a storm rolls in. Guests cluster near the fire, with mugs in hand. Someone starts to hum. Someone else joins in. The cat refuses to acknowledge the noise, and continues grooming with intense disapproval. You settle near the hearth once more, bowl in hand, warm and tired. The onions sway in the rising wind. You've started to think they're listening, and they haven't left yet, which means neither should you. Thunder rolls across the thatched roof, like an old wagon with one square wheel. The shutters rattle half-heartedly, as if they'd rather not be part of this weather event at all. The wind sighs its way down the chimney, and the fire crackles louder in protest. Inside, though, the inn holds. It creaks and leans, but it holds. The guests are clustered near the hearth now, faces pink from heat and cider, eyes heavy from bread and the kind of stew that dares you to stay awake. Rain lashes the windows. The smell of wet wool hangs near the door like a guest who won't take the hint. You've wrapped yourself in a wool blanket that's only mildly itchy and entirely stolen from an empty bench. The cat seems fine with this arrangement and curls next to you, occasionally swiping at a rogue strand of your hair like it's defending the upholstery. Above, the onion rope sways, catching every flicker of firelight. Here's your slow, oniony fact of the day. Some believed that onions could absorb storms hung above doorways. They weren't just signs of hygiene. They were quiet protectors against bad weather, absorbing dampness and keeping spirits, literal and atmospheric, at bay. In Germanic folk tradition, onions were tied with red string to still the wind. In southern France, a bowl of onions on the windowsill was said to quiet the rain. Whether this worked or simply distracted people from the leak in the ceiling, we'll never know. Historians remain skeptical, though. One 13th century inn ledger refers to onions as the inn's ears. No context, just that. And frankly, no one's ready to unpack it. You sip a little more cider, feel your eyelids sink. Someone has begun snoring from the other side of the fire. Not aggressively, just rhythmically, like a saw in a slow forest. The innkeeper walks through, eyes the onions, gives his usual approving grunt. They sway once, then settle, still crisp, still listening, still in charge. The storm continues, deep into the night, but you've already folded into sleep long before the worst of it arrives. You wake at dawn to pale gray light slipping through the shutters and the soft dripping of rain easing off the thatch like it's changed its mind. The inn is quieter now than you've ever heard it. Still, but not empty. You stretch. The blanket is tangled around your knees. The cat is gone, leaving behind a single warm spot and several strands of fur that have joined your clothing like they pay rent. You rise slowly, blinking through the last threads of sleep, and make your way toward the hearth. The fire has burned down to a faint glow, a red-orange hush in a room full of sighs, and above it, the onions, still hanging, still whole, still somehow present. Today's historical detail. Innkeepers who took pride in their onions often replaced them with ceremony. Some did it on solstices, others before big feast days, or when a particularly troublesome guest finally departed. It wasn't just maintenance, it was an act of quiet renewal, a resetting of the room. One account from 1472 notes an inn in York that hung a blessed onion during Lent to ensure peace among travelers sharing close quarters. Another simply reads, replaced rope, previous batch took ill. Scholars can't agree whether this phrasing referred to the onions or the guests. You help the innkeeper sweep out the ash, tidy mugs, fold blankets into mostly square shapes. A new guest arrives just as the sun breaks through the clouds. Muddy boots, hopeful eyes, she stops under the doorway and looks up. The onions sway gently. She nods. You smile. There's no check-in desk, no printed rules, just a few creaky floorboards, a dog that may or may not belong to anyone, and that string of onions that tells you everything you need to know. You refill the stew pot, just in case, and as the fire crackles back to life, the inn begins to hum again. Not loud, not busy, just alive, with guests, with warmth, and with onions still quietly keeping score. The inn has settled into a familiar rhythm again. Chairs creak, mugs clink. A loaf of bread is being aggressively negotiated at the far table between two travelers who've just realized they're heading to the same village, but dislike each other's shoes. You're at the hearth once more, rewrapping a new onion rope. The old one is gently retired, placed near the window where it will dry out in peace, or become part of tomorrow's stew, possibly both. Here, everything gets 2 lives. The fresh onions are firm, glossy, and slightly pungent. They're tied with twine, and a dried sprig of thyme, for good measure. You string them slowly, each one swinging slightly, as it joins its neighbors, like a row of little judges preparing to file their reports. Historical detail for the hour. Onion ropes weren't just a medieval fad. They've stuck around in parts of Europe well into modern times, especially in alpine and rural French regions, where they're still hung in kitchens, barns, and yes, above hearths, for luck, health, and pest control. It turns out the onion rope may have been one of the longest-running wellness trends in history. One curious tradition from southern Italy involved singing to the onions as you hung them, short-rhymed blessings to sweeten their guard. Whether this actually helped or just made dinner more poetic is unclear. Historians mostly agree. Onions were both symbol and substance, easy to grow, hard to fake, and surprisingly versatile. Back in the tap room, a group of tired merchants begin playing a dice game. The rules are unclear, but everyone agrees the stakes are low, and the laughter is warm. The dog circles the table once, then lies down dramatically, like it's had a long day of emotional labor. You hang the final onion. The rope sways, fresh, honest, quietly alert. You wipe your hands, return to your bench, and sip the last of your cider. And as the light fades once again into the familiar, honey-hued twilight, you begin to feel the ache in your limbs. Not sharp, just deep, satisfying, like you've earned this bench, and this moment, and the onions agree. That night, you're offered a room. Not just a bench by the fire, but an actual room. Up the crooked stairs, to the left, behind a door that doesn't fully close, unless you nudge it with your hip and whisper something encouraging. You thank the innkeeper. He shrugs, but in a generous way. The room is small, slanted, and smells of lavender, candle wax, and something faintly nutty. The bed is straw-filled, but generously piled. A tiny window lets in the cool night air, and above the bed, a single onion, tied to a rafter with red thread. It sways faintly as you set your things down. Here's your historical whisper. In some households and inns, a single onion was hung above the bed to absorb illness. It was said to pull fevers from the sleeping body, draw out night vapors, and guard against dreams that walked too close to death. Whether anyone truly believed this or simply appreciated the comfort of a familiar ritual is up for debate, but records show that these practices were common, especially during plagues, when sleep was both rare and precious. There's a softness to the room, a quiet that hums. You lie down, pulling the heavy wool blanket over your shoulders. It scratches just enough to remind you it's real. Outside, the wind brushes the side of the inn, like a polite visitor who doesn't want to come in. The onion overhead sways once more, and this time it feels less like it's raiding the room, and more like it's keeping watch. You wake slowly, earlier than usual, but rested. There's a soft blue glow through the tiny window, and the air is crisp, like the room has been politely chilled by the night and is now offering you a clean start. The onion above you is still there, of course. It hasn't fallen. It hasn't wilted. It hangs steady and round, like a bulb-shaped moon in a straw-scented sky. You sit up, stretch. Your spine complains once, quietly. The bed creaks its farewell. A bird outside chirps, like it has a schedule to keep. You leave the room quietly, stepping past creaky floorboards and muttering apologies to your own knees. Downstairs, the taproom is empty, except for the innkeeper and the dog, who is clearly not a morning person. You help rekindle the fire. It only takes a few breaths and a handful of kindling to get the glow back. The warmth creeps in like an old friend. Historical detail of the hour. Most medieval inns began their day with a fire and a hot pot of pottage, a thick stew that was added to constantly and rarely emptied. It might include barley, peas, leftover bread, herbs, or even beer-soaked onions. The flavor was consistent. The texture, open to interpretation. The innkeeper gestures to a pot already bubbling faintly. You lift the lid. It smells like rosemary, lentils, and something faintly smoky. Breakfast of champions, or at least survivors. As the room slowly fills with warmth and light, the door creaks open. A traveler enters, young, damp, and nervous. She eyes the hearth, then the ceiling, then the onions. She nods. Here's your cultural curiosity. In some parts of England, it was believed that an inn without onions was a house without ears. Not just bad luck, but untrustworthy. Without onions, how could a place hear the air? How could it guard your rest? It's a strange belief, but oddly poetic. You pour a bowl for the traveler. She thanks you, in a voice like cracked pottery. You gesture to the fire. She sits. The dog sighs. The cat appears from somewhere it shouldn't have been. And once again, the inn is awake, quiet, steady, slightly scented. The onions are, of course, watching and approving. It's your last day at the inn. For now, your bag is packed. Your socks are dry. Your bones feel almost entirely your own again. You're not in a rush to leave, though. No one ever is. Inns like this have a way of folding around you gently, like a blanket that doesn't mind your shape. You share one more meal. Bread that's slightly more confident than usual. Stew that might now legally qualify as vintage. The innkeeper adds a dash of vinegar and declares it bold. You sit near the hearth with your mug, the light falling in dusty shafts through the window. The onions catch the sun for a moment and glow like something holy, or at least extremely nutritious. Historical send-off fact. Onions were among the first foods packed by travelers on the road. Light, long-lasting, and oddly versatile, they were sometimes eaten raw with bread, or cooked into roadside meals over small fires. More than once, a weary guest was known to trade a good onion for a night's shelter or a pair of dry socks. One 14th century diary mentions a man who carried a single onion across 3 towns and used it to pay his way home. Whether this was an economic miracle or a very persuasive onion, no one knows. You check your pack. You've got bread, cheese, and, yes, a small, glossy onion, a farewell gift from the innkeeper, tied with a scrap of red thread. No words were exchanged, just the offering and a nod. You sling your bag over your shoulder. You thank the dog. You receive a grunt. You thank the innkeeper. You receive a grunt. And as you step toward the door, you look up one last time. The onion rope sways gently, like it's not saying goodbye. Just see you next time, and bring clean socks. The door creaks as it closes behind you. You step out into a day that smells of damp earth and wood smoke, and just the faintest hint of last night's stew that clings to your cloak like a loyal, overcooked friend. The inn is behind you now, tilted, warm, and still very much awake inside. You can almost hear the dog settling back into its corner, the fire crackling to life again, the murmur of new guests examining benches and glancing up at the ceiling with practiced instinct. You walk slowly. Your boots squish slightly with each step, but it's a good kind of squish. You pass the woodshed, the sagging water trough, and the crooked post where someone has carved a face that looks suspiciously like the innkeeper, possibly the dog. The onion in your pack bumps gently against your side. One last historical thought before we leave. Onion ropes were more than decoration, more than air filters, more than symbols. They were an invitation, a signal that someone inside cared enough to string them up, keep them fresh, and pay attention to the details that others ignored. You remember the moment you arrived, exhausted and muddy, and how your eyes found those onions swinging gently above the door. They didn't promise luxury. They promised something better, a place that was trying. Your boots find a better rhythm now as the road opens before you. You hear a lark somewhere overhead. A cart creaks in the distance. Someone is baking bread, and it smells so good it almost turns you around. But you keep going. The onion swings quietly in your pack with each step, like a metronome, like a memory, like a goodbye. You don't need to say out loud. And now, let the road blur behind you. Let the steady rhythm of your footsteps soften and fade until even the weight of your pack becomes light, and the smells of wood smoke and stew and woolly blankets become just gentle echoes. Let the memory of the onion rope hang softly in your thoughts, warm, familiar, faintly sweet, a symbol of safety, of stillness, of sleep made sacred in a crowded, crooked world. You've walked through storm and stew and sleepless tap rooms. You've traded stories for cider, folded blankets without asking, and learned to tell a good inn by its air. Now the fire is somewhere far behind you, but it's still burning. The bench is still there. The cat is still judging. The onions are still watching. And you're still wrapped in the memory of warmth, in the scent of thyme, and fresh straw, in the quiet approval of something humble and true. Let your thoughts soften now. Let them sway like the rope above the hearth. Let them settle, layer by layer, like the calm at the bottom of a long, candlelit night. There is no need to hold anything now. Let the air be still. Let the stew simmer far away. Let the onion rope guard your sleep. And as your breath slows, and the day becomes something softer, know this: the room is clean, the hearth is lit, and the onions say, "You can rest now. Sleep well."